Malaysia Air Flight 370 is probably the most unprecedented airline accident in all of modern aviation. With all the media buzz, theory, speculation, and misinformation, the aspects of this flight have become quite overwhelming. So, to break down all the variables of this accident, we're going to look at 5 scenarios and by process of elimination, rule out the ones that don't fit the evidence. Scenario number 5, hijacking. The first major problem with this scenario is a simple question. What was the aircraft hijacked with, in terms of weaponry? Kuala Lumpur International Airport security is just as stringent as any other. In fact, back in January, it was described by one passenger as being over the top, and even the pilots had to submit to a pat-down prior to boarding. But assuming a weapon was brought on board and the assailants could get past the reinforced cockpit door and then force the pilots to fly a suicidal path like Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, it still wouldn't account for the transponder being switched off rather than squawking the hijack code of 7500. And with 35 business class seats on this aircraft, each equipped with in-flight entertainment as well as air-to-ground phones, it doesn't add up that for nearly 7 hours, not one passenger would have made a call. Add to this that all the passengers had AVOD or audio video on demand and could see their moving map display in the seat in front of them, then they would have known that a hijacker was forcing the airplane into the middle of nowhere for 7 hours. So, the variables for a hijacking look like this. Number 4, explosive decompression. This wouldn't be the first time decompression would be a factor. In August of 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 suffered from this circumstance and the entire crew and passengers, save for one flight attendant, were rendered incapacitated. The aircraft continued on its planned route before finally running out of fuel and crashing in Greece. The reason decompression doesn't add up for this flight would be the aircraft's routing, a sharp turn to the southwest followed by a series of headings eventually leading to the south. If the crew had been incapacitated, it doesn't make sense that the aircraft could have made those course changes, especially when you consider the fact that in the southern Indian Ocean, there are almost no waypoints for the flight management computer and autopilot to fly to. Add to this that in an emergency the transponder should be set to the emergency code of 7700 instead of being shut off, and the other variables for this situation look like this. Number 3, an onboard fire. Now there are 2 previous aircraft accidents that can be used as a reference for this scenario. In 1983, Air Canada Flight 797 caught fire while flying to Montreal. From the time the fire was first reported to the time the aircraft landed and burst into flames was only 20 minutes. In the case of an aircraft that caught fire and didn't make it to an emergency landing, we can look at Swissair Flight 111. Now a fire could account for the loss of radios and therefore no distress call, and it could even knock out the transponder and other pieces of equipment. However, it doesn't add up that a fire could be so selective as to render the transponder, ACARS, and radios inoperative, but leave the flight management computers and autopilot intact. Going back to Swissair 111, it only took 21 minutes for that fire to spiral out of control and cause the aircraft to crash into the Atlantic Ocean. Any fire strong enough to render certain pieces of equipment inoperative and incapacitate the entire crew as well as all the passengers would most likely have engulfed the entire airplane as well. Number 2, a catastrophic electrical failure. In this instance, let's assume that a catastrophic electrical failure rendered most of the equipment on board inoperative. Now in this scenario, a lot of the pieces of the puzzle do match up. Without electrical power, the radios would go out and therefore not allow a distress call. With no electricity, the transponder, ACARS, flight management computer would all go out as well. But the Achilles heel to this situation is that with a loss of all main electrical power, the backup source of electricity, the ram air turbine, kicks in. A comparable incident to this would be that of Air Transat Flight 236. Now it lost all of its electrical power as well, although in this case it was due to fuel exhaustion. Nonetheless, electrical power was lost, the ram air turbine engaged, and the crew made an emergency landing in the Azores. Therefore, if Malaysia Air Flight 370 had a catastrophic electrical power failure, the ram air turbine should have still engaged, allowing the pilots to use their radios and communicate the problem at hand. But this never happened. On top of that, keep in mind that even an aircraft as advanced as a Boeing 777 still has an old-fashioned magnetic compass in its cockpit, so the pilots could have always fallen back on old-fashioned navigation and dead reckoning. But if that were the case, then the final course to the south, to the middle of the southern Indian Ocean, doesn't make sense. Why choose to fly a heading for nearly 7 hours that leads to the middle of nowhere? Why not just fly northwest where you know you'll make landfall in India, or at any time head east and try to hit Indonesia? And it's for these reasons, among others, that an electrical power failure doesn't add up either. Number 1. Pilot suicide. While this is a taboo subject, it has happened before. FedEx Flight 705, Egypt Air Flight 990, LEM Flight 470, and Japan Airlines Flight 350 are just the notable examples for this scenario. Even last month, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 702 was hijacked by its co-pilot who locked the cabin out of the cockpit. If one of the pilots had left the cockpit on Malaysia Air Flight 370 and the other one turned off cabin pressurization to knock out all the passengers and crew, then all the variables line up. It would explain why there is no radio communication or any distress call. It explains why not one passenger in business class used their in-flight phone to tell a relative that something was wrong over a 7-hour period. The ACARS and transponder could be shut off, and it would explain how an airplane flies into the middle of nowhere where almost no waypoints exist for a flight management computer or autopilot to fly to. Tragically, the pilot suicide scenario seems to be the one explanation where, so long as all the current data that's become available is accurate, follows the principle of total evidence and perhaps Occam's razor. However, it is also possible that this aircraft accident fell under another idiom, that of Murphy's Law, like we've seen in other aircraft accidents from the past, and until the data flight data recorders are recovered, no definitive answer will be known.